All right. Welcome back to the Northridge Sports Podcast. This is episode 5 now. This is Mike Robinson, by the way, just to introduce myself. Today's topic, I want to talk about a little bit about my All-Star predictions, but as opposed to just predicting who I think will be All-Stars, I want to approach this a little bit differently and talk about who I think should be All-Stars and how I think the All-Star selection process should be. This is just my own opinion, so if you disagree, that's fine. Also keep in mind that what I'm about to share is not how it actually is, but it's just my opinion on how I think it should be. And it's for a variety of reasons, which you'll realize as I kind of explain my thought process. But I think the current All-Star selection and the game itself, the All-Star game, is not the way it should be. I think there's some flaws with it. It should be updated and modernized with the changes in the league. So I do believe it's a little bit outdated in some ways, but also it's lost relevance as well. Relevance to just the individual game that people watch, but also a little bit of relevance historically, because, like I said, some things have changed in the NBA over time, and I think that the All-Star should adapt and reflect those changes. The very first thing I want to talk about is that the number of All-Star selections should be increased. Every year there's somebody that's snubbed from an All-Star selection, or somebody just completely left out of consideration for being an All-Star, mainly because there's just not enough spots. Now I get the game, the rotation may not be more than like a 10-man rotation in the All-Star game, which means that even if you add more than 12, I mean those players may not touch the floor. Although I do think they should get some playing time if, just like in a regular game, one team is blowing the other team out or getting blown out, then you should be able to sub like your third string players in and give them some minutes to let them get some experience on the floor. But I do think the All-Star game should be approached competitively, and I do think there's some ways to kind of fix the competitive level of All-Star games. But I think that there should be some sense of like pride on the line for the team winning. That one team wants to beat out the other team. You know what I mean? And so you want to put your best players on the floor. Also, excuse any interruptions I might have. I got my youngest daughter here, so she tends to walk in on my videos or whatever. Can you go back upstairs, Mommy? Yeah. Go upstairs. Thank you. All right. So yeah. So I like to see a competitive game, and so they should be playing to win. So you want your best 5 on the floor for the majority of the minutes, and substitute in as needed or whatever. But by the way, I'll say this too. So currently there's 12 selections from each conference, and I think I forget. I think it's unofficially they have some guys as reserves in case somebody's injured and they have to fill their spot. So they already kind of do this, but I think that there should be a total of 15 official All-Star selections. There will be a starting 5, and you can say the second string unit, that's the second 5, could be second unit, so to speak. But I think every player from 1 to 15 should have in their record books All-Star selection 1 through 15. And part of that is because I think that the league has more depth. There's literally more star players. There's players with more fame, more notoriety, more star power. And then you'll notice too with the selections that I have, and it's a little different East from West. You know, when I reveal my selections, you'll notice that there's players that are near to the bottom. They're in the bottom 5 teams of their conference, and yet there's a major star player that I think like deserves an all-star spot just because of their stardom and the performance and the numbers that they're putting up individually for their team. So to me, I think that it's only fair to give 15 spots. The next thing I want to talk about too is that selection for All-Star should be based on a couple of factors. Thing number one is, and I think this is the most important thing, your individual performance the season that you're being selected for the All-Star should matter and trump any other factor. Your individual performance that season, I mean your stats, your numbers, you as an individual player, that should factor in more than what you've done in previous seasons. An example would be like, let's say LeBron or Steph Curry or Kevin Durant. Those are some of the biggest names that have had the most amount of like fame and notoriety for the longest amount of time in the NBA currently. And a player like LeBron, as the seasons go on, his individual numbers may not be as big or as impactful, any given season moving forward as maybe some young up and coming star that maybe doesn't have the same name and star power as LeBron, but they're performing better individually. Their team has more team success, and they're just on a whole doing better that particular season. That should merit you being an all-star over another player that just has a big name and superstardom status, despite what they've done in the past. That should not factor into the season that you're awarded an all-star. Another example besides like a LeBron, because LeBron's doing decent. But another person is like a Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler has a big name, but he's not performing as well this season. And another factor is he hasn't played as many games. He's been out, which is factor number 2. Is that I think once you reach roughly 41 games into the season, which as of recording this video, pretty much mostly every team is somewhere around 40 games right now for the season. I think that in order to qualify for an all-star, you should have played a minimum of 25 games. That's a little more than half the games of the season currently. So to begin being selected for an all-star, you can't have been injured like a Joel Embiid and only played 7 games. But because you're a star, and when you do play, you put up big numbers, you haven't been available on the court long enough to me to be awarded being an all-star. And it's a similar thing when they're doing end of the year, end of season awards. First team All-NBAs, the MVP. Like, as you know, I think the NBA has implemented a rule where you have to play like 65 game minimum to get rewarded certain things. Well, All-Star is kind of little past mid-season. I think roughly 2/3 of the way through the season is when the All-Star game begins, or at least the selections have been finalized for who's going to play in the All-Star game. Maybe the game itself occurs roughly 3/4 of the way through the season. But I think similarly, even though it's not a full season, you should have played a little more than 50% of the games, in my opinion, to be considered selection for an All-Star. If you've barely played on the court, how are you really a All-Star caliber player that particular season? So I think that should factor in. And another thing that should factor in as well, which ties into the minimum games played, is that your team success should factor and weigh in as well as you being selected as an all-star. And to give you an example, if your team is literally at the very bottom of the NBA, the bottom of your conference, or you're the worst team in the entire NBA, but you're putting out some outrageous numbers individually, and maybe you've been a superstar caliber player, but because of your team record being so low, I think that makes you ineligible for being an all-star over someone who has, let's say, moderate level success, and their team record is, top 5 in the NBA. Like, there's a person on a team that's one of the top 5 teams that deserves it over a player who's in the bottom 5 teams, and they may be putting up a little better numbers, and maybe their name is bigger, but to me, your past success should not factor into the current season. But also, you have to have a winning record on your team, and at least be in the top 10 in your conference. Which leads me to my next point, is that I personally believe that there should be at a minimum one player from every team in the top 10 teams in each conference. Because the way I look at it is, the top 10 teams can either be in the playoffs or be in the play-in. And there should be a star player that represents each of those teams that should qualify to be an all-star. Which leaves the bottom 5 teams in each conference, and the only way I think a player that's in the bottom 5 of their conference should be considered for an all-star is if, in that instance, I would say they do have a big name or star power or notoriety, and their stats, their individual stats reflect that they're better than someone on a team above them, that may be considered to be more deserving. One sec. Pia, you can go upstairs with mommy. Yeah, go upstairs. Hold on a second. All right. Anyway, so you'd have to be a big name player, have a lot of star power, and be putting up, numbers that are significantly higher than a secondary star player on a team that's has more success, in order to be considered for an all-star. And you'll kind of see with my selections how that's played out for me in picking the players. And so I think I've kind of explained the gist of everything. If I remember something else, I'll bring it up as we go along. But I'm gonna go ahead and go down the list. I'm gonna start with the East, then we're gonna move to the West, and you'll see like the East was like a little bit easier to select than the West. The West actually is a little bit tricky, and you'll see why in a minute. So in the East, starting with I remember one other thing. So another thing that I think should be different with the All-Star selection is that the players selected should be based on them being the number one player on their team for the season that they get selected as an All-Star, regardless of position. So basically positionless picking for All-Star, which could result in an imbalance potentially. I don't know if there'll ever be a situation where the best player on every team in the NBA is like a guard, and there's like no bigs that are dominant. You know what I mean? I doubt that'll ever happen, even though we are in a more guard dominant league today. So there are more guard players, guards and wings, point guards and stuff like that tend to lead their respective franchise. But there's still, I don't think there's ever a time where there'll be like no big men ever that'll be, qualified for an all-star. And in recent history, it's been like all big men selected as MVPs for a little while. You got the Nikola Jokic and Embiid and Giannis. Like you got some big men that are sitting at the very top of like MVP selections and kind of beating out guard and wing positions and stuff like that. But normally all-star selection is based on front court and back court. So there's a certain number of front court players that get selected, and there's a certain number of back court players that get selected. Personally, I feel like the reason why that's a problem is if there's a guard player that is more dominant, has more star power, makes a bigger impact for their team and their team success, but because we've ran out of spots to put a guard player in, then some big man basically just automatically gets put in ahead of them, just because we wanted to keep it balanced. I think that's not the way All-Star should be ran. Even though historically it may have been that, but it was more of a big man heavy league, and I think in the past a center had to be selected for an All-Star. I think they've changed that now. They've changed it in recent times to just reflect front court and back court, which still puts the potential that a center can be in, but I guess it could also be power forward or something like that. But in my opinion, I think you should do away with that completely, because it should purely be based on who's most deserving of being that all-star. Now, I want the games to be as competitive as possible and teams to just figure out how they're going to win. But if you have a situation where one conference has more guards and another conference has more bigs, I mean, it's not for a championship. It's just for a single game. I say play it out and see what happens. See who would win that matchup between guards versus bigs. Are guards more dominant and can outplay a team that has more big men, or does size really matter the most in an NBA game? And that they prove that that the smaller team is at a disadvantage. I don't know, but this would give us an opportunity to try it out. You know what I mean? Because you think about the format of All-Star games in recent history, they've been a joke. Like, players they're just out there clowning around, throwing up circus shots. Nobody takes the game serious. They can put up 150, 60 points, and there's no defense, and like players have not really taken it serious. And the NBA has had to step in and try to force rule changes to the game to create the competitive atmosphere for the game. Okay. Anyway, however, I think the rule changes have been ineffective for the most part, and I think that there's some other ways that they can foster competition. But to me, if the All-Star game is going to be a joke anyway, why not experiment and see what happens? I think just having a lineup where you got to figure out that dynamic, that in and of itself, I think would create a challenge that players will want to. They would want to see themselves. How is this going to play out? Can we outplay a team that's bigger than us? But with that being said, if you see from my selections, it is relatively balanced anyway. There are a little more guards, but I think that just reflects the change in the league where we're in a little more guard dominant league. But there's still from my selection list. There's still a balance of like big men and small guys and stuff like that. But again, I'm not selecting on positions. I'm selecting based on just the best overall player from each team that's most deserving, regardless of position. So just throwing that out there. And then I'll say one thing right away with the format that I think should change, and I'll come back to this later on some of the changes I think they could make. But one that I personally would like to see is I would like them to return to an East versus West matchup. And the reason is because, number one, historically it was always Eastern Conference stars versus Western Conference stars. And they changed the formats over the years, but, or I should say just in recent times they've changed the format. But in my opinion, I like to see what conference is the best, because there's always this like little talk about it. And I personally, like, I'm a fan of the Bucks. I've always been a fan in the Eastern Conference, and for a long time the East has been considered the weaker conference, which I don't think is entirely true. But when you do look at the teams and the standings, you see that the West has a little more competition. In the West, there's a little more balanced from top to bottom teams that are good across the West. So you would say overall the West probably has a little more competition, and it's a tougher conference to come out on top in. So I think that is somewhat true, but I think it's not fair to just call another conference weak without putting one versus the other to see who wins. Now, in the finals, it's always a team from one conference versus a team from the other conference that match up in the finals, and I like that. I like that. But All-Star should have a similar relevance. The difference is, instead of the best team, you're having the best players from all different teams in that conference representing that entire conference. And then those two teams can match up, and then we can see who's really the best conference. Is the East weak, like they say? Or is the, and the West is the best? Or is it the East that beats out the West and proves to be more dominant? I would like the format to be East versus West, personally. And again, I think that gives the game itself a little more relevance, because it's something to play for. It's bragging rights, East versus West. When you mix up all the players and they're just randomly on different teams, I think it has less relevance to me. It like, well, whoever wins just depends on what team you happen to be flip-flopped on. Like, I personally don't think that's a good idea. But anyway, moving on. I'm going to go ahead and hop to my selections. I'm going to break down a little more things as I reveal my picks. So the very first pick for the East All-Stars from the Cleveland Cavaliers, I picked Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell has played more than the minimum games that I'm saying I think should be a requirement, and he's leading the team in points. And I'm gonna say another thing. So selecting players, when you look at an individual team and like who's the best overall player, because there's a lot of teams that have multiple really good players. There's a good number one, and sometimes there's a really good number two. And who do you pick? Now, some people would automatically pick the number one, like, star leader of the team, right? But to me, you got to look at their numbers. And if one player is outplaying another player statistically, it doesn't matter if the other guy is like the leader of the team or the bigger star player. In my opinion, it matters who's putting up more numbers. And the first number I'm selecting off of is points. So points trumps everything else. If you're leading your team in points, then you are the number one player. You're the number one star in the team. The points matter more than anything in my book. if the number 2 player is close in points, within like a 2-point differential, then I think it's fair to factor in rebounds and assists. And if your overall rebounds and assists is higher, even though you're like a point less in points per game, I think that player has more impact on winning on that team, and therefore that player deserves the selection because of their overall stats. But points is number 1. So I don't have this in front of me. I guess I could pull it up because I do have it saved on my phone or whatever. But when I was looking these up yesterday, kind of preparing for this talk, Donovan Mitchell, if I'm not mistaken, each one I selected, for the most part, the player has significantly more points per game, average points per game, than the number 2 guy. So Donovan Mitchell, leading the team, he's number 1 for the Boston Celtics. I know there's a lot of talk about there being a lot of talent across the Boston Celtics, a lot of players that contribute to the success and winning for that team, and especially Jaylen Brown. Jaylen Brown has done a fantastic job with that team. Ended up being the Finals MVP. He's a great player, taking nothing away from him. But statistically, if you look at Jason Tatum, he's averaging significantly more points, but he's also averaging more rebounds and assists than Jaylen Brown. So Jason Tatum statistically across the board is really, really doing more. And I think on the defensive end is where they're kind of a little more even. But I think one of them, I forget, is averaging a little more blocks, and they're almost the same in steals. So Tatum statistically is kind of doing a little bit of everything for the team. I think more respect should be put on his name. He's definitely the selection from the Celtics as the guy that should be selected number 1 for the All-Star. So Donovan Mitchell from the Cavaliers, Jason Tatum from the Celtics. From the New York Knicks, this was the first tough one. Like I said, Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, those were kind of easy ones when I looked at the numbers. When I looked at the Knicks, it's really, really close to me. Jalen Brunson is averaging like 0.1, if I'm not mistaken, points per game more than Karl Anthony Towns, just by a tiny bit. Basically a fraction of a point, not even a whole point more. But Karl Anthony Towns, Brunson is also averaging more assists than Karl Anthony Towns, but Towns is averaging way more rebounds and a few assists per game compared to Brunson's assists, which are not as high, and then Brunson's barely getting any rebounds, and then on top of that, Karl Anthony Towns is averaging more blocks, which should be obvious. A big man's going to average more blocks, but usually a guard is going to average more steals. Karl Anthony Towns is averaging more steals than Brunson. So to me, in my opinion, I think Karl Anthony Towns deserves the All-Star selection over Brunson. Now, don't feel too bad because a little foreshadowing. Brunson still gets a spot, but as a starter, I think the first pick from the Knicks should be Karl Anthony Towns. I think he's had more impact in winning and their success this season, and all of the storylines in the media, which is another point I want to make in a second, but all the storylines in the media, a lot of talk is about Karl Anthony Towns and the impact that he's made to their team this season. So he's just making a lot more buzz and noise in the media. But when you look at the numbers and you see where their team is at and their success level, you have to say that, like, I think he's the biggest difference maker. Also, I don't even know if Mitchell Robinson's back yet, but Karl Anthony Towns has had to step into the starting center position since their main center has been out due to injury, and he's performed well. He's been holding it down. I think he's arguably the best big man in the East right now. I mean, it's between him and Giannis, in my opinion. But just based on team success, I'm gonna have to side with Karl Anthony Towns. So anyway, so Karl Anthony Towns is the third pick. The fourth pick, going with the Orlando Magic. This is another one that at first appeared to be tough because I looked at the numbers and the points per game, rebounds per game, pretty much across the board statistically. Paolo Banchero is the number one guy. But then when I looked at the number of games played, both Paolo and Franz Wagner, which is the number two guy on the team, leading the team in points per game, both of them have been out some significant stretches of this season, have not played as many games. The only difference is Franz Wagner has played more than the minimum 25 games, whereas Paolo has not. Paolo has, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's played less than 20 games on the season. So he's played less than 50% of the season. And to me, when you look at the Orlando Magic's team success and where they're at in the standings currently, the success of the team cannot be contribute to a player that has barely been there. Now, when he plays, he dominates and leads the team, but him not being available and on the court this season, there's been other guys that have been the difference maker in winning games and giving their organization the current record and standings that they currently have. So those other players deserve a bit more, respect and credibility in their win shares, and then their contribution to playing winning basketball and all-star caliber level for this season. So for me, being that Franz Wagner has played more games, he's played enough, like I said, past the minimum threshold. He's played more than 50% of the games, and he's the second leading scorer on the team. I'm putting him in for Orlando as an all-star selection. I think he deserves it. I think he's been a huge contribution to that team this season and in recent years, and I think he definitely deserves credit and deserves to make it as an all-star. All right, I'll probably be editing this out. I don't edit some stuff just because they're minor interruptions, but I pretty much always have them every video, and it just is what it is. But anyway, so moving on with the Pacers. This was another close one. This was another really, really close one because Pascal Siakam is leading the team in points and he's leading the team in rebounds and he's getting a fair amount of assists. I just think Tyrese Halliburton is so close to Pascal's points per game while also putting up a significant more assists than Pascal is putting up. Than Pascal's putting up assists. And then he's also still getting a fair amount of rebounds. So I think when you look at them, they're almost dead even. On the defensive end, Pascal's getting a little more blocks. But if I'm not mistaken, Tyrese is getting a little more steals. And I just felt like Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal are so even that I think the tiebreaker should be star power. I think it should be based on star power. So Tyrese Halliburton, in my opinion, he deserves it over Pascal. But don't worry, little foreshadowing. Pascal makes the list too. And I'll explain a little more why when I get to him. But so the starting five would be Donovan Mitchell, Jason Tatum, Karl Anthony Towns, Franz Wagner, and Tyrese Halliburton for those all-star selections. And again, it's based on team success and the player that stands out as the biggest contributor to that team's success, in the standings at this point in the season. So next with the Milwaukee Bucks, I picked Giannis. Now that was an easy pick. Giannis is far and away leading the team, dang near in every statistical category except for I think assists. But Giannis is dominating and really carrying the Milwaukee Bucks to their success, and individually he's putting up in my opinion like MVP caliber numbers, and if you were just to look at his stats, his numbers on paper, him compared to like Karl Anthony Towns, for example, comparing two big men, Giannis looks better on paper. It's just the Knicks have a little more team success than the Bucks right now. So Giannis would be the selection from the Milwaukee Bucks. Okay, now moving on to the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat was another tough one because right away the first thought in my mind was Jimmy Butler. And I do want to say something too. In my previous video where I talked about my playoff predictions, I was predicting an upset by the Miami Heat, but that is contingent upon Jimmy Butler playing in the playoffs. If Jimmy Butler's playing, I think regardless of the issues surrounding him and the team, and him maybe demanding a trade or the team wanting to trade him, all the issues going on, if Jimmy Butler does not get traded and he's still with the team come playoff time and they are in the playoffs, they have a chance to upset someone. And I do think if it happens to be the Knicks, maybe the Pacers, I really think it'd be tough to beat out Cleveland or Boston. But I still think he'd put up a tough fight just because of Jimmy Butler alone. Jimmy Butler, I think, will put his feelings to the side and play his best basketball come playoff times, because he is really a competitor at the end of the day, and on his watch he's not gonna let it go down without a fight. So with that being said, if Jimmy Butler gets traded, then throw that prediction out the window. Same is true for injury. So I made assumptions based on a team being healthy and fully available. Injuries just changes everything. If a team's injured going into the playoffs, they could be a number one seed team, but their star player gets injured. You can forget about it. They may get upset by a lower seeded team. With that being said, Jimmy Butler hasn't played as many games this season. He's near the minimum number of games played in order to make an All-Star selection, but also his production has been down as well. His points per game, stats across the board have been down, and he's not leading the team in scoring. Right now it's Tyler Hero. And Bam is pretty much leading the team in a bunch of other categories, obviously rebounds, but the defensive end, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Bam has about the same or slightly more assists than Tyler Hero. So he's really doing a lot for the team in every other category, but Tyler Hero is far and away leading the team in points, and I think he's done so successful this season. He might not be as big of a star, but I think based on his performance this season, he deserves some credit. At some point, a player should be able to break out into being a star, and I think one of those things is by successfully leading your team into a good record where you can compete into the playoffs. And where the Miami Heat currently stand, I think if you were to pick from the Miami Heat, I think Tyler Hero deserves the credit for making it as an All-Star. Next on the list, talked about this before too in my playoff predictions. The Detroit Pistons have made a big improvement this season over previous seasons. They went from being one of the bottom teams in the NBA to like middle of the pack. Now they're not, if they make it into the playoffs, they're probably going to lose in the first round. They're going to get beat out by a better team. Even if they win a game here or there, they're not going to beat a better team in a 7-game series. I think they're too inexperienced, and they're lacking a little bit of skill and talent and depth of some of the top seeded teams. But as I'm making this video, the Pistons are currently as an 8th seed in the East, and so they've been doing better this season than in past seasons. And when you look at Cade Cunningham's numbers on paper, you'd be surprised. Like, he's not leading the team in rebounds, but if I'm not mistaken, for sure points, but also assists. And he's doing decently in every other statistical category. He's grabbing a decent amount of rebounds. Like, I don't want to look up the numbers at the moment because that's not as important right now. But just know overall, like, Cade Cunningham is doing good across the board. Also playing tough on the defensive end. So Cade for sure is the selection from the Pistons. So Cade Cunningham, to me, deserves an All-Star selection. If I'm not mistaken, this would be his first if he gets selected. Number 9, the Atlanta Hawks. This was an easy one. Trae Young. Yes, there are other players that are doing well on the team and contributing to that team's success. When it comes to scoring the basketball, grabbing rebounds, playing defense, but between points and assists, Trae Young is putting up crazy numbers, especially in assists. But if I'm not mistaken, he's either leading the team in points or it's close. I forget offhand. But yeah, just comparing the players, Trae Young for sure deserves it. And even if it was close, there was like a close second to Trae Young. Trae Young's star power would be the difference maker in like a tiebreaker between a number 1 and number 2 on the team. So I kind of want to look that one up just so because I had to do this for a plethora of teams in both conferences, so I remember the numbers offhand, but Trae Young to me deserved it for the Atlanta Hawks. In the 10th spot, the Chicago Bulls are currently sitting at 10. If you remember what I said, I believe the top 10 teams all deserve one player. That's my personal opinion. I think the top teams all deserve one player. I personally think the All-Star selections should be spread out a little more. I don't think there should be a team with like 3 or 4 players. There could be some teams with 2 players, but to say a team ever deserves like 3 or 4 All-Stars, they'd have to be doing something crazy as a team, each individually, for there to ever be a team with like 4 All-Stars from one team. I think that it should be more spread out, and not only do I think that's the way it should be, just from a I don't know, just like a fair standpoint to reflect the impact that players across the league are making in the NBA. But I also think just from a business standpoint from the NBA, I think that it makes more sense to have more teams represented in the All-Star. You think about it like this, right? If you're a fan from one of these franchises that your team is near the bottom of the NBA, and you don't have a player from your team or your franchise selected as an All-Star, when the All-Star game comes around, you might be less interested in watching them play because it's a bunch of players that you're not rooting for. Versus if it's a player from your team, you're more likely to want to tune in and watch to see how your player from your franchise that you're rooting for, you're more likely to want to tune in and watch them play. So if the NBA takes like 3 players from one team and 4 players from another team and 3 from another and 2 from another, and then that's it, that's all the teams represented, those might be the only players playing in the All-Star game, and there'll only be like a few franchises that'll have their fan base most excited to watch. If you're just a general fan of like the entire NBA, and you like teams, you like players from a variety of teams, then yeah, maybe you would tune in if you're a hardcore fan. But the average fan wants to root for and watch their team where they're from, the team that they root for. So I think from a business standpoint, it's more in the NBA's interest to kind of spread out the number of selections. So I think the top 10 teams for sure deserve a player from each team. And then I'm saying the top 10 by, at least midway to 2/3 of the way through the season. So wherever the standings are there, it might change a little bit by the end of the season, but pre All-Star game, wherever your team ranks in the standings, that should be the basis of who gets selected. And then I remembered one other detail while explaining this. Part of the reason why I think it should be selected this way, based on performance of a player, is because, in my opinion, historically the majority of the fan base that vote on the All-Star game, they're voting All-Stars based on two factors. One, popularity, and then two, bias. Neither are relevant to who deserves to be an All-Star. For example, like I talked about Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler versus Tyler Herro. This season, Tyler Herro is doing more for his team to be in the standings where they're at. Tyler Herro has played nearly 40 games, or at least more than 30. And then Jimmy Butler has played less than 25. And then when they do play, Tyler Herro's putting up better stats and better numbers. It's not even like Jimmy was injured, but when he does play, he's playing like an MVP, like in the case of like Joel Embiid. I think Joel Embiid has played less than 10 games, but when he plays, he's the most dominant player on the team. So it's like, okay, he's the best player, but this season he's barely done anything worth anything. Not to mention the 76ers are also really low in the rankings. But let's just say they were the number one seed in the NBA. Hypothetically, if the 76ers were the number one seed, and points per game when Joel Embiid plays, he's number one on the team. But he's only played a handful of games, 5, 6, 7 games. Then you'd have to credit the team's success not on Joel Embiid, but on the number 2 player that has been there majority of the season. So like a Maxey might have played 38, 39 games or something like that. And he's number 2 in points per game. He's put up more total points. Maxey should be the guy that deserves it, not Embiid. But fans, if the general population votes, they're gonna vote the bigger star name. They're gonna vote Embiid over Maxey. And then not only that, because I think the media plays a part in influencing the general public's opinion on teams and players and stuff like that. But also, so sometimes they talk more about a player that's not even doing as much, and talk less about a player that's actually doing more. And so from the outside looking in, you would think the player that's talked about more is more impactful to the team. But then when you look at the numbers and stats, you see, well, wait a minute, hold on. This player is doing more. He's averaging more points, more rebounds. You know what I mean? Like this player may deserve it over that player. So anyway, that's just a little example. But the other part is bias. So let's say you're a die-hard fan of a team. For me, I'm a fan of the Bucks. You could be a fan of, let's say you're a diehard fan of the Washington Wizards. When you go to vote for All-Star, who are you going to vote for? You're probably going to vote for Washington Wizards, unless you like a little bit of a hater to your own players and like, man, F them, like they suck, they're not playing good. I'm voting for somebody else. But there's a lot of team fans out there that they don't care how good their players are. They're gonna vote for all their own team. Like I know somebody personally, fan of the Bucks. Every vote is for Bucks players. They will not vote on a single other player to be an All-Star. Only all Bucks players. Should the starting five of the Bucks make it as All Stars? No, maybe one or two, but definitely not all five. So that just kind of goes to show like fan voting is unreliable. I would more trust players and coaches and stuff like that. But regardless, I think my format takes it out of it being a popularity contest or a vote, because it would just based on purely like who's performing the best on each team. But anyway, so Bulls currently in the 10th spot. The best player overall is Zach LaVine. Zach LaVine for the Bulls. In a lot of these cases, the star is the number one guy on the team. For the 10, I've already said in the East. I think the only ones that were like a little tricky is like Karl Anthony Towns. Some people would say Brunson over him. For the Magic, you would say Paolo Banchero. It's just I don't think he's played enough games in my opinion. Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal were very, very close. I'm picking Tyrese over him. And then the Miami Heat, I would pick Jimmy Butler, but like I said, Tyler Herro is doing better this season. To me, he deserves it. So that's the 10. Now remember, I think the regular All-Star selections is 12, but I'm going to 15. So I'm gonna try to speed through these other ones a little bit and move on to the West. So in the 11th spot, I chose Jalen Brunson. To me, he's so close to Karl Anthony Towns in the reason why the Knicks are successful this season. To me, Brunson is deserving of an All-Star selection. Same thing for the Pacers. Like I said, it was very close between Tyrese Halliburton and Pascal Siakam. So I picked Pascal Siakam to me for the 12th spot. For the 13th spot, Jaylen Brown. As you know, the Boston Celtics are doing really, really well. And to me, Jaylen Brown is a huge contributor to that success. If you're wondering, the number 1 seed team is the Cleveland Cavaliers. And yes, Garland is doing really good. Some of the other Cleveland Cavaliers are also doing really good for the team. But Jaylen Brown's numbers on paper look a little bit better than any other number 2 guy for the Cavaliers. So I picked Jaylen Brown. And then same thing with the number 14 spot. I picked Damian Lillard from the Milwaukee Bucks. His points per game after Giannis is like really high compared to any other team and player above the Bucks' current record. There's no number 2 that outside of I'd say Jaylen Brown. Him and Jaylen Brown are pretty close. There's no number 2 I think that's performing better and contributing more to their team's success than Damian Lillard. He's also leading the team in assists. So Damian Lillard to me deserved a spot at number 14, and in the 15th spot. So I told you the top 10 teams. So if you're wondering, teams 11, 12, 13, what about those teams below the top 10? Are there any stars in the bottom 5 of the East? And obviously Embiid's a star, but he's barely played this season. To me, Embiid does not deserve an All-Star selection this year. Just due to injuries, he's been out. He doesn't deserve to be an All-Star. And then out of those other teams, there's not really many other teams with any standout stars, but there's one. There's one guy that to me deserves a spot as an All-Star as a number 15 spot. And remember, I only think players 1 through 10 for sure deserve to play minutes on the court. 11 through 15 are, bench, backup, reserve players. They may not see minutes on the court, but I do think that they should have in the record books an All-Star selection next to their name, despite, maybe they didn't play in the All-Star game. So in that 15 spot, to me, the guy that stands out is LaMelo Ball. LaMelo Ball, yes, his team record is pretty trash, but he is a big-name star. And if you look at his individual numbers, they're crazy. Like, I forget offhand, but I think he's putting up nearly 30 points per game. Something ridiculous like that. And he's played more than 50% of the games this season. So in my opinion, LaMelo Ball, I think, is deserving of the 15th spot. So that will conclude the East. I'm gonna move to the West. I'm gonna try to go through this a little quicker due to time, but also because I've already explained some of my reasons for my picks in the East. So when I move to the West, I'm really only gonna tell you about the close ones, and there happens to be a few. So we'll go through. First, the Thunder. To me, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for sure deserves it, hands down. Number one selection in the West for an All-Star. Him far and above every other player on his team. His stats are through the roof. Number two is the Rockets. The Rockets were a close one, but because if I'm not mistaken, Jalen Green averages just a little more points per game than Alperen Sengun. I think that's how you say it. Sengun is outside of points per game, and he's just tiny bit below the point per game average of Jalen Green. He's leading in he's beating out Jalen Green in every other category. He's not averaging the most assists on the team, but I think he's averaging like number 2 in assists while being number 1 in rebounds, if I'm not mistaken, or at least better than their number 1 player, Jalen Green, in terms of points. And then on the defensive end, he's doing crazy stuff too. I looked these stats up yesterday. I don't remember them offhand, but overall, when I looked at the stats of Sengun, he overall is the best player. So in my opinion, I know Green's has a little more star power and a little bigger name at the moment. I think Sengun deserves the All-Star selection over Jalen Green. So number 2, Sengun. Number 3, here's another tough one. The Grizzlies. So Ja Morant has played a little below that 25 game minimum, just a little below. But on top of that, if I'm not mistaken, when I looked at the stats between Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr., I think I'm gonna have to look this one up, because I know anybody that hears this is probably gonna think like, dude, I'm crazy for picking Jaren Jackson Jr. as an All-Star over Ja Morant, when Ja Morant's star power is insane. He's for sure a star in this league currently, and most likely in the future it will be a superstar for years to come. So I gotta look this up just to be sure. Bear with me as I look this up. Okay, so the Grizzlies did play a game since yesterday. Ja Morant was at 22 games played. He's currently at 23. Jaren Jackson Jr. has played 38 games so far. And points per game, Jaren Jackson Jr. is averaging 22.8 points per game currently. Ja Morant is averaging 21.4. So Jaren Jackson is leading the team in points. He's also, if we're just comparing Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson, he's above Ja in rebounds. Ja does beat him out in assists. And then steals and blocks. Jaren Jackson actually averages more steals and obviously more blocks. So I think it's really, really close between Ja and Jaren Jackson. If Ja Morant had played 25 or more games, I would be giving Ja Morant the spot. But because he's played below 25 games and Jaren Jackson has nearly played 40, you'd have to look at the team's success in the standings. The Grizzlies are currently the 3rd seed. Jaren Jackson has done more to secure that 3rd seed spot in the West than Ja has. Just because he's been available, he's been there, he's been on the court, and he's still averaging more points. I gotta give it to Jaren Jackson. So based on the stats and the numbers, I'm picking Jaren Jackson. So number 4 spot, the Nuggets. This one was an obvious pick. Nikola Jokic far and away is dominating his team. He's producing better stats than anybody. Nobody comes close. So Nikola Jokic, the 4th spot. The 5th spot, another close one. This one was between Kyrie and Luka. Similar situation as the Grizzlies. Luka has played about the same number of games as Ja Morant, about 22. As the time that I was looking up this list. Kyrie has played about 38 or 30 something. So Luka hasn't played as many games. When he plays, similar to Jokic, Luka dominates all across the board in every statistical category. Points, rebounds, assists. Like, I think he's killing it, and even defense too. I looked at his defensive numbers. He's killing on defense. They talk about Luka ain't got defense, man. Look at his numbers. He was doing pretty good defensively as well. Luka for sure, you would think, deserves the spot over anybody else from the Mavericks, but because of the minimum games played, he hasn't played as many games. He's played just over or right about 50% of games, and to me, I'm putting the number at 25. Midway through the season, if your teams play 40, 41 games, you should have played 25 of them. If you've played less than 25, and your team is near the top of your conference, somebody else is contributing a little more than you are to your team's success, and that person deserves it. And that person just so happens to be Kyrie. So for the 5th spot, I think Kyrie deserves to be an all-star. And before you go berserk, a little foreshadowing, Luka still makes it. Similar to like Brunson, Pascal Siakam, Jaylen Brown, Damian Lillard. They were number 2 guys or close second, and they're still in my book an all-star. Luka makes it. Just so you know. Number 6 from the Lakers. This was another close one. I'm going off the numbers. The one thing LeBron does more than Anthony Davis is assist the basketball. That is the only category that LeBron is outbeating Anthony Davis in stats. Anthony Davis is averaging more points, more rebounds, and more defensively. He's doing more. He's doing more blocks and steals. He's doing more on the defensive end, scoring more points, and grabbing more rebounds. He deserves his respect for all of the dirt that's been put on Anthony Davis's name in recent years. And I get it. He's been injury prone and so on and so forth. Been maybe inconsistent at times, unreliable at times. But when he plays, he is a dominant player, and his averages right now on the season to me prove that. He's also played, I think, like a game or 2 more than LeBron when I was looking this up. So he's also played a little more. I mean, it's not as big a difference as like Luka and Kyrie, whereas Luka hasn't played as much games, even though he's the more dominant player. That's really close, but still, to me, Anthony Davis is beating out LeBron every other statistical category, and to me, I don't think LeBron deserves to be an all-star just because of his name and his past performances. I don't think that should be it. I think is, what are you doing this season? If another player is outplaying you, that guy deserves it. I don't care how much the media talks about LeBron. They're talking about him a million times a day. They're barely talking about Anthony Davis. That does not mean LeBron deserves to be an all-star. What are you contributing to your team this season? Anyway, number 7, the what is it called? The Clippers, Los Angeles Clippers. This was a tough one too, because Norman Powell is leading the team in points. James Harden is not far behind him. I think it's less than a point or less than 2 point difference. But James Harden is leading the team in the other statistical categories compared to Norman Powell. And so to me, they're so close statistically. I do think Norman Powell deserves to be talked about a little more and given credit for the success of their team. I don't think he gets enough shine, but the combination of James Harden leading the team in other areas, besides being a little below Norman Powell in points. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's for sure assists, but I think he's ahead of Norman Powell in rebounds too. And I could be wrong about the defensive stuff, but a lot of these ones were like one guy was ahead in points, the other guy was like usually ahead in like every other statistical category. But I forget what James Harden. But even if it's like neck and neck, it's really close with some of these. I think that James Harden's star power is what is the difference maker. So in the event of that two players are very, very close statistically, I think that's where star power trumps everything else. Well, I shouldn't say trumps everything else. It's the tiebreaker. It's what will make the difference between the two. So James Harden, number 7, number 8 from the Minnesota Timberwolves is Anthony Edwards. So Anthony Edwards, number 8. Number 9. I know I kind of skipped past that one without saying too much, but just know Anthony Edwards to me is for sure the best player on the Timberwolves. Number 9 from the Sacramento Kings. What I was surprised with this one is how big of a difference in points compared to number 2 is. But De'Aaron Fox is far and away leading the team in points. And if I'm not mistaken, Sabonis is doing really, really good in like obviously rebounds, but I think some other statistical categories Sabonis is doing pretty well in. I think he assists the ball pretty good too, similar to like Jokic or Sengun, where they're like passing big men. I don't think Sabonis gets enough credit for his passing and his assisting and playmaking as a big man. But he's got a pretty decent number of assists too, but Fox is still way ahead in points, and I think he's leading the team in assists as well. And then what's his name? DeRozan's lower in pretty much every statistical category. His points is like nowhere near Fox's, if I'm not mistaken. So I got De'Aaron Fox, who I selected from the Kings, in the 10th spot. The Suns have been making a little bit of a comeback, more so than the 76ers. And in my playoff prediction video, I predicted that the 76ers would make a comeback. If I'm not mistaken, I did not predict the Suns would. They're proving me wrong. The Suns is proving to be the team that is making a comeback, and the 76ers not so much. Do I think that's going to change the outcome come playoff time? Probably not, because I don't know if the Suns will make it in, and if they do, I definitely don't think they're getting out of the first round. Well, I don't know. I might have to change come playoff time. I might have to make a new prediction video. But the Suns are making a little bit of a comeback, and I know Kevin Durant has been out for a bit, but surprisingly, Kevin Durant has played more than the 25 minimum that I'm saying. It might be just at 25 or slightly above, but he's played enough games to qualify in my book. And when you look at his points per game, he's definitely leading the team in points per game. So when he's on the court, he's for sure the most impactful player. I mean, I think he's making the biggest difference in winning, and that should be no surprise to anybody that knows basketball, that knows the NBA. Kevin Durant is a really great player, and he's definitely the reason that the Suns are being carried anywhere at the moment. So Kevin Durant is the number 10 spot for me. Now, 11 through 15. I'm gonna try to go a little quicker. Jalen Green. Even though I said Sengun is a little better and deserves the first pick as the All-Star selection from the Rockets, Jalen Green's a close second. I think he deserves a spot as the number 11 All-Star. Number 12, LeBron James. Same thing with Jalen Green. Very close to Anthony Davis, and he's just a megastar. So maybe the GOAT of all time. You know what I mean? So LeBron number 12. Number 13, Luka. Yes, Luka has not played the 25 game minimum, as I said, but there's not a lot of picks after those top 10 selections, and Luka's putting up crazy numbers when he is on the court. He's putting up ridiculous numbers. Like, go look at his stats. He's for sure leading his team when he plays. He's the most impactful player for sure, and his star power is crazy. He deserves it as a number 13 spot. Number 14, Steph Curry. You'd probably wonder, like, how did I leave Steph Curry out? The Warriors are below the top 10 seeds right now, so the Warriors just aren't doing good. They're in the bottom 5 in the West. The bottom 5. We'll see if the Warriors can make a push to at least be in the play-in selection. And the Warriors might mess around, make it in the play-in, and then lose the play-in and not even make the playoffs. So I mean, that would be disappointing. But you can't base off this year's All-Star selection off of prior year success. You got to look at this year. Steph Curry is doing great individually, and as you would expect. But it's just the success of his team is low right now. So he still would make it in my books as a 14th selection, and in the 15th and final spot, similar to like LaMelo Ball, where LaMelo Ball is in the bottom of the Eastern Conference in terms of his team, but individually he's doing outrageous. The Spurs currently have dropped below the top 10 seeds. If the playoffs started today, they would not even be in the play-in. And who knows if they're going to do enough to even make the play-in. They may just be in those bottom teams, unfortunately. But Victor Wembanyama is putting up ridiculous numbers. This is my list, by the way. I want to see. East. And then West. You see I crossed out Ja Morant. And then I got Victor Wembanyama. Let me see my finger. Victor Wembanyama, number 15. You know, he's putting up crazy numbers, historic numbers. He's doing good individually. It's just his team success is kind of trash. So he deserves to be an All-Star. Now, if anybody disagrees with my list, thinks somebody else should be in ahead of somebody else, please. I'm open to feedback, and at least somebody's watching the video at this point. I'd be really excited to hear from anybody. Obviously, be respectful with with debating or whatever. But I'm open to hearing other people's opinions, and if you disagree with mine, I'm gonna say one more thing before I wrap up the video, and that's, I'm trying to make it quick, but I think there needs to be something done to incentivize winning. I'm not going to go into a lot of details into possible things that could be done. I'm just going to say there should be something done, and it could be something as simple as just offering money to the winning team between East and West. But I think something should be done to spice it up. I know this year, the All-Star format is going to have a new change, so we'll see how that plays out. It might be for the good, but overall, something should be done to improve the All-Star game, and so that it's enjoyable for the fans. Like, I want to watch the All-Star game and be excited and entertained the whole way through, not because somebody did a half-court shot or They're doing like they're playing around, doing little tricks and through the legs, alley oop, and somebody dunks because nobody's playing defense. I don't want to see that kind of basketball. I want to see competitive basketball, and so whatever you got to do to incentivize the team that wins, I want to see it moving forward in the All Star. But that's it for me. I'll catch you guys in the next one. This is Mike Robinson. Peace out.